July 2, 1937. Amelia Earhart, the most famous aviator in the world, vanished into thin air. One moment, her voice crackled through the radio. The next, silence. No wreckage, no remains, no answers. What happened in those final, haunting hours above the Pacific? Did her plane sink beneath the waves? Was she stranded on a forgotten island? Or captured, her fate erased from history? For over 80 years, the world has searched for the truth. Expeditions have scoured the ocean floor, bones have been examined, and theories multiply, yet the mystery remains unsolved. This is not just the story of a missing pilot. It is the story of a legend who dared to defy gravity, and in doing so, disappeared into immortality. Welcome to Dark History. This is Amelia Earhart, the vanishing that haunts us. Subscribe now, and step with us into the skies of mystery. Because, in the darkness, history whispers louder. If you crave the untold, the eerie, and the unsettling, you've found your place. Subscribe now, and join us as we journey deep into the shadows of the past. This is Dark History. Chapter 1. The woman who defied gravity. It begins not in the sky, but on the ground. A young girl, restless, curious, and daring, staring upward at the vast horizon. The year was 1907, a time when women were expected to be silent, obedient, and bound to tradition. But Amelia, Mary Earhart, was never made for the ground. From her earliest days in Atchison, Kansas, Amelia carried within her a spirit that defied convention. She wasn't content to simply play with dolls or sit quietly at tea parties. No, Amelia preferred the rush of climbing trees, firing rifles, and racing across fields with the boys. She sought danger, even as a child. She sought the thrill of the unknown. Her family was not stable. Her father, Edwin, battled alcoholism, while her mother, Amy, struggled to maintain a sense of dignity amidst constant financial trouble. Amelia's world was shaped by instability, but it was within that turbulence that she learned resilience. She would bend, but she would not break. When the Wright brothers had taken flight in 1903, the world had changed forever. But for young Amelia, it wasn't until she attended an air show in 1920, in Long Beach, California, that she discovered her destiny. As the biplane roared overhead, the earth itself seemed to tremble. Her eyes widened, her breath caught, and in that moment, she knew she belonged in the sky. The first time she boarded a plane, just a short 10-minute ride, her fate was sealed. Later she would write, "As soon as we left the ground, I knew I myself had to fly." But this was not an era where women were encouraged to pursue aviation. Flight was dangerous, experimental, a domain dominated by men with goggles, leather, helmets, and nerves of steel. And yet, Amelia pushed forward. She worked odd jobs: nurse, social worker, stenographer, saving every penny until she could take flying lessons. Her instructor was Anita Netta Snook, one of the very few female pilots of the age. Together, they carved a path through the skies of Southern California. Amelia showed not just talent, but obsession. She was at the airfield constantly, willing herself into the cockpit again and again, long after her peers had gone home. In 1922, just 2 years after her first flight, Amelia set an altitude record for female pilots: 14,000 feet in her little Kinner Airster biplane. The world began to notice. Newspapers began to write about this daring young woman who dared to enter the male-dominated world of flight. But Amelia Earhart was not just a pilot. She was becoming a symbol. The 1920s were roaring, a time of jazz, speakeasies, and rebellion against the old world. Women had won the right to vote in the United States, and the flapper generation was redefining femininity. Amelia, short-haired, slim, and fearless, fit perfectly into this revolution. She represented something new: independence, courage, and freedom. By 1928, her name was about to become legend. That year, She was chosen to be the first woman to cross the Atlantic Ocean by airplane, though she was merely a passenger on the flight piloted by Wilmer Stoltz. The journey captured the imagination of the world. When they landed in Wales, Amelia became an instant celebrity. The press dubbed her Lady Lindy, comparing her to Charles Lindbergh, who had crossed the Atlantic solo the year before. The fame was intoxicating, but Amelia was restless. She didn't want to be known as just the woman passenger. She wanted to fly. She wanted to prove herself. 4 years later, in 1932, she did exactly that. At dawn, on May 20th, Amelia Earhart climbed into her Lockheed Vega 5B in Newfoundland. Her goal, to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. The risks were staggering. Only Lindbergh had done it before. Countless others had perished trying. The Atlantic was unforgiving icy waters, unpredictable storms, and no room for error. The flight was grueling. Amelia battled strong winds, icy conditions, and a leaking fuel tank. Her plane shook violently as she pushed forward through darkness and storm. But Amelia refused to turn back. After 14 hours and 56 minutes in the air, she landed in a field in Northern Ireland, alone, exhausted, victorious. She had done it. Amelia Earhart had become the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic, and with that, she cemented her place in history. The world erupted in celebration. President Herbert Hoover awarded her the Distinguished Flying Cross, the first ever given to a woman. Newspapers hailed her as a hero. Young girls looked up at her photograph and saw new possibilities. But Amelia was not done. She would go on to break more records. The first woman to fly solo, non-stop, coast to coast across the United States. The first person to fly solo from Hawaii to California. The fastest transcontinental flight by a woman. Each achievement pushed the limits of what was thought possible. Her fame only grew. She wrote books, gave lectures, and became a prominent advocate for women in aviation. But beneath the public image of confidence and calm, Amelia carried her own private doubts. She admitted to fear, to nervousness, to uncertainty. Yet she never let it stop her. Her husband, George Putnam, a publisher and promoter, helped craft her public image. He marketed Amelia as the perfect blend of daring adventurer and approachable role model. Together, they built a legend. But Amelia was not simply a product of publicity. She lived what she preached. She believed in equality, in courage, in chasing dreams no matter the obstacles. Her words captured the spirit of her time. The most effective way to do it is to do it. By the mid-1930s, Amelia Earhart was not just a pilot. She was a global icon, a beacon of possibility, a figure who made the impossible seem within reach. And yet, there was something more, something darker, because Amelia Earhart was not content to rest on her laurels. She wanted one final challenge, one last flight that would eclipse all others, a journey that, if completed, would make her immortal. That challenge was to fly around the world. It was audacious, dangerous. The world was vast, the technology still fragile. To circle the globe by airplane in 1937 was to flirt with death itself, but Amelia was determined. She would not be remembered as the woman who had simply crossed oceans. She wanted to be remembered as the woman who conquered the planet. The planning was meticulous. A specially modified Lockheed Electra 10E was prepared. Navigators were recruited. Routes were mapped. Every detail considered. But even with all the preparation, the risks were enormous. Friends and colleagues worried. The press whispered about the dangers, but Amelia smiled through it all. To her, the fear was part of the point. Without risk, there could be no triumph in interviews. She dismissed the danger with her trademark mix of confidence and humility. One of my favorite phobias, she said, is that women don't do things just because no woman has ever done them before. Actually, that's the main reason for doing them. It was not arrogance. It was conviction. Amelia Earhart was not chasing death. She was chasing life. She was chasing meaning. And so, in the summer of 1937, Amelia prepared to take off on that journey that would define her legacy forever. A journey that would lead her into the skies of legend and into the shadows of mystery. But before we reach the vanishing, before the unanswered questions and the endless theories, we must first understand the woman who dared to challenge the sky. Amelia Mary Earhart, the girl who climbed trees, the woman who crossed oceans, the pilot who defied gravity. She was a pioneer, a symbol, a dreamer, and soon she would become a ghost. To understand her disappearance, we must first understand her courage. And to understand her courage, we must follow her story from the beginning into the storm that awaited. Chapter 2. A world obsessed. The 1920s and 1930s were an age intoxicated by the sky. Airplanes had transformed from fragile novelties into the gleaming symbols of progress. The sound of propellers and engines was the sound of the future arriving. In cities and small towns alike, people would gather in fields just to watch aircraft take off and vanish into the clouds. It was a time of fascination, a time of obsession. Aviation was still dangerous, still uncertain, but it carried with it the promise of shrinking the world, of conquering distance itself. And in a world still recovering from the Great War, a world longing for heroes, the skies produced them. Charles Lindbergh was the first great icon of the air. In 1927, his solo flight across the Atlantic captured the world's imagination. The newspapers printed his name in bold headlines. Crowds greeted him by the tens of thousands. He became the golden boy of aviation, the man who had proven the impossible was possible. But soon, another figure would emerge. Not a man, not another rugged leather-jacketed adventurer, but a woman, slim, quiet, with short-cropped hair and an unshakable gaze. Amelia Earhart. She did not simply fly, she defied. She crossed barriers invisible, but no less powerful than oceans. For in the 1920s, the idea of a woman pilot was not just rare, it was almost unthinkable. And yet, when Amelia Earhart touched down after her first transatlantic journey in 1928, the world took notice. She was not the pilot that day, merely a passenger, but the press did not care. Here was a woman who had done what no woman had done before. She had crossed the Atlantic. She had touched the sky. The headlines were breathless. Lady Lindy, they called her, comparing her to Lindbergh. Photographers followed her every move. Reporters wanted her words, her smile, her story. Overnight, she was transformed from an obscure social worker into an international celebrity. But what the world saw was only part of the story. Amelia understood the power of image. She knew that her celebrity could be used to inspire, to open doors, to advance not just her own career, but the very role of women in society. And she leaned into it. With the help of her husband, George Putnam, a skilled publisher and promoter, she became more than a pilot. She became a brand. Her face appeared in newspapers, in magazines, on posters. She endorsed luggage, clothing, even cigarettes. To some, this commercialization seemed shallow. To Amelia, it was strategic. Every deal, every advertisement funded her flights, her research, her dream of pushing the boundaries of aviation. But beyond the marketing was something deeper. Amelia Earhart became a symbol at a time when the world was searching for meaning. The Great Depression had shaken the foundations of daily life. Millions were unemployed, hungry, desperate. Yet here was a woman who soared above it all, literally. She represented freedom at a time of limitation, hope at a time of despair. Women, especially, saw in her a figure of possibility. In her short hair, her leather jacket, her calm determination, they saw independence. They saw courage. They saw a rejection of the roles society tried to force upon them. Amelia did not merely fly for herself. She flew for all of them, But with adoration came pressure. Every move she made was documented, judged, dissected. If she succeeded, she was celebrated. If she failed, she risked ridicule, not just for herself, but for all women who looked up to her. Amelia bore this weight with grace, but it was heavy nonetheless. When she made her solo Atlantic crossing in 1932, the obsession reached fever pitch. Newspapers around the globe carried the story. Radio programs interrupted their broadcasts to announce her success. Letters poured in by the thousands. Children drew pictures of airplanes and signed them for Amelia. She was more than a pilot. Now, she was an idea. But obsession is never simple. With fame comes intrusion. Paparazzi waited outside her home. Journalists speculated on her marriage, her friendships, her choices. And not all of the attention was kind. Some critics dismissed her achievements, suggesting her flights were stunts, orchestrated for publicity. Others sneered at the idea of a woman daring to step into a man's world. Amelia, ever calm, brushed it aside. She knew the truth of her flights. She knew the risks she had taken, the storms she had battled, the loneliness she had endured at 10,000 feet in the dark. Fame was the price she paid to keep flying. And yet, the world's obsession was not just with Amelia Earhart, the pilot. It was with Amelia Earhart, the mystery. Even in life, there was something enigmatic about her. She revealed herself in interviews, but only so much. She smiled, she charmed, but she kept parts of herself hidden. She was open, yet distant. Present, yet untouchable. This mystery only deepened as her ambitions grew. Each new flight was bigger, bolder, more dangerous. And with each risk, the public held its breath. Would she succeed again? Or would this time be the end? The obsession was not only with her triumphs, but with the possibility of her fall. The newspapers, so eager to celebrate, were just as eager to speculate on disaster. Amelia's fame was a double-edged sword. It elevated her to legend, but it also sharpened the knife of scrutiny that followed her everywhere. By the mid-1930s, Amelia had become an inseparable part of global culture. She dined with presidents. She met with kings and queens. She was photographed with movie stars. Her name was spoken in classrooms, in boardrooms, in homes across the world. She was no longer just Amelia Earhart. She was Amelia Earhart, and with that status came expectation. Expectation to keep pushing, to keep breaking records, to keep inspiring. She could not stop. The world would not let her. But fame is a cage, no matter how gilded. And as much as Amelia loved flying, she longed for privacy. In her journals and letters, she wrote of the exhaustion that came with constant public attention. She yearned, at times, for quiet, for the chance to simply be Amelia, not the icon. And yet, she knew she could not go back. Once the world is obsessed with you, there is no returning to obscurity. You must either keep soaring or fall. The obsession reached its climax with her decision to attempt the ultimate flight, a circumnavigation of the globe. The media swarmed the story. The world leaned in. This would not be just another record. It would be the record. For months, newspapers chronicled every step of preparation. The Lockheed Electra, the planned route, the crew, the sponsors, the risks. Every detail was scrutinized. People who had never set foot in an airplane suddenly spoke of Amelia Earhart as if they knew her. She belonged to the world now. When she finally took off in 1937, the obsession turned to obsession without breath. Every radio call, every stop, every sighting was reported. Crowds gathered at airfields just for a chance to glimpse her plane. The world was watching. The world was waiting. And when the radio calls went silent on July 2, 1937, the obsession became something darker. Hope, fear, desperation, endless speculation. Because when someone belongs so completely to the world, when someone carries not just their own dreams, but the dreams of millions, Their disappearance is not just a tragedy. It is a haunting. The obsession with Amelia Earhart did not end with her life. It began with her vanishing. But to understand why the world could never let go of her mystery, we must first understand the depth of their fascination. She was not simply a pilot. She was a symbol. A woman who made the impossible possible. A dreamer who lived as if the sky itself was home. And when such a figure disappears, the world does not move on. It clings. It obsesses. It demands answers. Even when there are none. Amelia Earhart became the world's obsession in life, and she would remain the world's obsession in death. But the story does not end here. It was only just beginning, because what followed was not only a search for a lost plane, but a search for truth. A search that would span decades, generations, and continents. A search that continues even now. The obsession with Amelia Earhart did not fade. It only grew. Because the more the world learned, the more questions arose. And the more questions arose, the more the legend grew. In Amelia Earhart, the world saw itself, its hopes, its fears, its desire to rise above the ordinary. And when she vanished, she left behind not just an empty sky, but a void of meaning that humanity has been trying to fill ever since. She was not just a woman. She was an idea. She was not just a pilot. She was a mystery. She was not just Amelia Earhart. She was the world's obsession. And that obsession has never let go. Chapter 3. The dream to circle the globe. The sky had given Amelia Earhart everything: fame, purpose, immortality. But it had also left her restless. Records had been broken. Oceans had been crossed. The applause of the world had thundered in her ears. And still, she was not satisfied. For Amelia, flight was never about simply proving what could be done. It was about pushing the line forward, daring gravity to hold her back, daring history to say no. And in the mid-1930s, there was only one challenge left that could truly satisfy that hunger: to fly around the world. It was not a new idea. Others had dreamed it. Some had even attempted it. In 1924, the U.S. Army Air Service had managed to circle the globe, but with multiple pilots, 4 aircraft, and months of trial and error. No woman had ever come close to such a feat. Few men had dared to try it solo, and no one had attempted it in the sleek, streamlined era of modern flight. For Amelia, this was the ultimate test, not just of aviation, not just of skill, but of herself. The dream had taken root years earlier, but it began to take shape in 1936. By then, Amelia was the most famous aviator in the world, perhaps second only to Lindbergh. She had influence, she had connections, she had sponsors willing to back her daring ventures. But a project of this scale required more than fame. It required precision. The aircraft would be critical. She chose the Lockheed Electra 10E. A twin-engine, all-metal monoplane, custom-built for long-distance flying. It was not simply an airplane. It was a machine of ambition, fitted with extra fuel tanks, advanced radio equipment, and reinforced systems. The Electra was Amelia's silver steed. The plan was audacious. A journey of nearly 29,000 miles. 29,000. More than 20 stops, crossing continents and oceans, traversing some of the most hostile environments on Earth. The North Atlantic, the deserts of Africa, the jungles of South America, the endless expanse of the Pacific. This would not be a flight of leisure. It would be a gauntlet, and Amelia knew it. But she was not naive. She understood the dangers as well as anyone alive. Engine failure, navigation errors, storms, illness, political tensions. Each leg of the flight carried risks that could end not just the journey, but her life. Still, she pressed on. Her husband, George Putnam, supported the plan wholeheartedly. He saw in it not just the chance for Amelia to make history, but for her legend to become untouchable. And he knew Amelia well enough to know that she would not be deterred. Once her mind was fixed on a goal, no argument, no warning, no fear could hold her back. But Amelia did not chase the dream recklessly. She prepared, she studied, she surrounded herself with experts. She recruited navigators with experience in the most perilous stretches of the globe. She pored over maps, weather charts, and fuel calculations. Every detail mattered, and yet, even with all the planning, the sense of unease was impossible to ignore. Friends whispered of their worries. Colleagues raised their doubts. The press alternated between excitement and dread. The world wanted to see Amelia soar, but some feared they might see her fall. Still, she smiled. In public, she brushed off the dangers with her trademark calm. Preparation, I have always believed, is the key to luck, she would say. But, in private, her writings revealed something else. A recognition that this flight could well be her last. She even wrote a letter to her husband, to be read if she did not return. In it, she confessed that she knew the risks, that she was ready to face them, and that her choice was her own. She was not reckless, she was resolved. The route itself was chosen carefully. Initially, Amelia planned to fly westward, across the Pacific first. But after a disastrous early attempt, when her Electra ground looped on takeoff in Hawaii, badly damaging the aircraft, she was forced to reconsider. Repairs took months. By the time she was ready to try again, seasonal winds made the westward journey too dangerous, so she reversed the plan. This time, she would fly eastward. From California, through South America, Africa, India, Southeast Asia, and then across the Pacific back to the United States. It would be longer, more complicated, but safer in terms of weather. It was a decision that would shape everything that followed. Amelia's determination to complete the flight was not just about records. It was about legacy. She wanted the journey to stand as proof of human courage, of female possibility, of the shrinking barriers of a vast world. She wanted children to look at a globe, trace the path she had flown, and believe that nothing was beyond reach. But beneath the grand vision was something more personal. Amelia was restless. She had lived in the public eye for nearly a decade. The pressure, the attention, the constant demand for her time and presence had drained her. She longed for freedom again, the kind of freedom she had felt in her earliest flights, when the world was just wind and sky. This flight, for all its risk, promised that feeling again. It promised solitude, escape, and meaning. Her crew reflected her seriousness. Among them was Fred Noonan, a skilled navigator with experience flying Pan-American Airways routes across the Pacific. Noonan was respected, knowledgeable, but also troubled, known for his drinking, burdened by personal struggles. Still, he was considered one of the best, and Amelia needed the best. Together, they charted the course, leg by leg. Fuel stops, radio frequencies, alternate airfields, everything was planned, yet everything was uncertain. For in 1937, aviation was still as much art as science. Radios failed, maps were imprecise, weather reports were guesses more than guarantees, and the Pacific was vast. In the weeks leading to the departure, the world watched with fascination. Newspapers published maps of the planned route. Headlines tracked every development. Crowds gathered wherever Amelia appeared. Once again, she belonged not just to herself, but to the world. The dream to circle the globe was no longer just Amelia's dream. It was humanity's dream. Her courage would be humanity's courage. Her triumph would be humanity's triumph. And, if she failed, it would be humanity's tragedy. For Amelia Earhart was no ordinary pilot. She was the woman who had defied gravity, who had conquered the Atlantic, who had turned the sky itself into a symbol of possibility. To see her fall would not simply be the loss of a pilot. It would be the loss of a dream. The preparations stretched on, tests were run. The Electra gleamed under the sun, ready to take on the impossible. Photographers snapped pictures. Journalists scribbled notes, crowds waved, and Amelia, calm and poised, stepped into the cockpit again and again. There was no turning back. Her friends asked if she was afraid. She smiled and answered, "Courage is the price life exacts for granting peace." And then, with the world watching, she began. From Oakland, California, to Miami. From Miami to South America. From South America to Africa. From Africa to India. From India to Southeast Asia. The dream was no longer a plan on paper. It was unfolding, leg by leg, mile by mile. The skies embraced her once more. The world leaned in closer, but beneath the excitement, there lingered a shadow. A whisper that no amount of planning could silence. A whisper that grew louder with every mile closer to the Pacific, because the Pacific was waiting, and within its endless waters, its storms, and its silence, the dream to circle the globe would reach its most dangerous test. For Amelia Earhart, the dream was not simply to fly around the world. It was to leave behind a mark so permanent, so unforgettable, that no one could ever erase it. She would succeed, or she would vanish, and the world would never stop asking why. Chapter 4. The ill-fated journey begins. The summer of 1937. The world stood still, watching. Newspapers had already begun to write of Amelia Earhart's greatest adventure, and her silver Lockheed Electra gleamed like a symbol of human progress, poised to conquer the horizon. But the journey, though cloaked in optimism, began under a veil of unease. Amelia had already failed once. Her first attempt, a westward journey, had ended in disaster. The accident in Hawaii, that ground loop on the runway, had nearly cost her everything. The aircraft was crippled, repairs were extensive, and her dream was forced into pause. For some, it was an omen. For Amelia, it was only a delay. By June, the Electra was ready again. The scars of the accident were patched with new metal. The engines tested and tested again. The fuel tanks refilled with hope and calculation. The route had been reversed, eastward, with the Great Pacific saved for last. It seemed safer, more reasonable. But as every aviator knew, nothing about circling the globe was reasonable. On June 1st, 1937, Amelia Earhart lifted off from Miami, Florida. The second attempt had begun. The first legs carried her down the spine of South America. To San Juan, to Caripito, Venezuela, then on to Natal, Brazil. Crowds gathered at every landing strip, waving flags, reaching out hands, desperate to touch the woman who embodied courage itself. In every newspaper photograph, Amelia was smiling, cool, steady, the picture of confidence. But inside, she carried the weight of something heavier. At Natal, the Electra leaped across the Atlantic, a treacherous crossing even in modern terms. The engines roared for hours, the horizon an endless sheet of water, the sky shifting from gray to black to dawn. And then, Africa, Dakar, St. Louis, Khartoum. The journey marched forward, each stop a marker carved into the earth. The press kept pace, publishing updates like dispatches from a war front. Each landing was a victory, each departure a risk. The world leaned closer, and Amelia, though exhausted, pressed on. The Electra carried her across the Sahara, its vast dunes stretching beneath her like an alien world. Then, over the jungles of East Africa, thick, humid, alive with unseen threats. The plane was heavy, straining at times, but it held. She wrote home often. Her letters carried that same quiet balance of confidence and foreboding. She described the beauty she witnessed, the sunsets over Africa, the patterns of rivers and mountains seen only from the sky. But between the lines, a sharper truth bled through: fatigue, the immense strain of constant travel, the recognition that each leg of the journey could unravel everything. By the time she reached Calcutta, then Rangoon, then Bangkok, the Electra had carried her nearly halfway around the world. Yet the most dangerous stretches still lay ahead. The Pacific loomed like a promise and a threat, waiting at the edge of the map. Amelia was not alone, of course. Fred Noonan sat beside her, map spread across his lap, eyes scanning for bearings, radio crackling with static. He was a man of immense skill, but he was also haunted. His drinking was no secret, his personal life troubled. Some whispered that he was unreliable, but Amelia trusted him. She had to. He was her lifeline across the featureless expanses of ocean. Together, they traced their course eastward, through Java, through Timor, each stop bringing them closer to the point of no return, and always, the world was watching. Newspapers in New York, radios in London, headlines in Paris. People everywhere followed her progress, tracing her route across globes and maps pinned to walls. She was not just flying for herself anymore. She was flying for humanity, for the belief that the world could be circled, that courage could tame the unknown, but the unknown does not yield easily. In Lahaye, New Guinea, the Electra touched down for what would be its last confirmed stop. It was July 2nd, 1937, the final, most perilous leg lay ahead, the crossing of the Central Pacific, from Lae to tiny Howland Island, a speck of land just 2 miles long, sitting alone in the immensity of the ocean. The distance was 2,556 miles, more than 20 hours of flying, no landmarks, no cities, no second chances. The island was so small, so remote, that finding it would be like finding a needle in the largest haystack on earth. But Amelia was undeterred. To her, this was simply the next step. She had come too far to turn back. In Lae she wrote her last letter to her husband, George Putnam. It was not a farewell, but it carried the weight of one. She spoke of fatigue, of hope, of pressing forward. Please, no, I am quite aware of the hazards, she had written earlier. I want to do it because I want to do it. The Electra was refueled, inspected, its engines checked, its wings polished by mechanics who perhaps wondered if they were preparing the plane for a triumph or a tomb. Amelia and Fred loaded charts, rations, equipment. Radios were tested, though never with certainty. Communication across such vast waters was fickle at best. The Coast Guard cutter Itasca was stationed at Howland Island, waiting to guide her in with radio signals, smoke plumes, anything to make the invisible visible. The night before departure, the air was heavy with tension. Some described Amelia as calm, composed. Others saw the strain in her face, but in her voice, there was no wavering. She would fly. She must fly. And so, on the morning of July 2nd, as dawn broke over New Guinea, Amelia Earhart climbed once more into her silver Electra. Fred Noonan took his seat beside her. The engines thundered to life, the propellers slicing the humid air. A crowd gathered, watching silently as history prepared to lift from the earth. The Electra rolled down the runway, lifted its nose, and vanished into the sky. No one who watched that takeoff could have known they were witnessing the last confirmed sight of Amelia Earhart alive. The journey, once a dream, had become a haunting. For as the Electra disappeared into the horizon, it carried not only Amelia and Fred, but the hopes of millions, hopes that would soon dissolve into static, confusion, and silence. The ill-fated journey had begun, and the world would never forget how it ended. Chapter 5. Into the Pacific. A Flight into Silence Dawn. July 2nd, 1937. Lae, New Guinea. The air was heavy with tropical mist, the soil damp with the residue of night. Mechanics moved briskly about the Lockheed Electra, their hands quick, but their eyes uneasy. They checked the fuel tanks, tightened bolts, wiped the polished wings with rags that smelled of oil and sweat. They worked not only on a machine, but on a dream, one that now balanced on the razor's edge of success and disaster. Amelia Earhart stepped from the small quarters where she had spent her final night on solid ground. She was pale, but composed. Her short hair pinned neatly, her eyes sharper than her expression betrayed. Fred Noonan followed, carrying his maps, charts, and navigation instruments, his face lined with the weariness of a man who had lived too many lives in too little time. The runway it lay stretched out like a promise and a threat. The Electra was heavy, weighed down with 1,100 gallons of fuel, enough to push its engines and wings to the limit. The takeoff would be dangerous. The humid air clung thick, reducing lift, and the Electra would need every inch of the strip to leave the ground. Spectators gathered in silence, sensing the gravity of the moment. To them, this was history in motion. They did not know they were watching the beginning of a tragedy. At 10 a.m., the engines roared. The twin propellers spun to life, slicing the morning air into a thunderous rhythm. Slowly, the Electra began its run, straining forward, gaining speed. The wheels rattled against the earth. The aircraft quivered under its burden, as though reluctant to leave safety. But at the last moment, the nose lifted, the wheels left the runway, and the silver bird ascended into the low clouds. For those left behind in La, it was the last time they would ever see Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan alive. The journey from Ley to Howland Island was more than 2,500 miles. Nearly an entire day's flight over the featureless expanse of the Pacific Ocean. No mountains, no cities, no rivers, no landmarks. Only endless water, an infinity of blue stretching in all directions. Howland itself was little more than a sandbar, 2 miles long, barely visible even from above. For a pilot, it was a speck. For Amelia, it was salvation. For if she missed it, even by a few miles, there would be nothing but open ocean, and no fuel to turn back. The U.S. Coast Guard cutter, Itasca, waited at Howland, engines idling, smoke ready to billow from its stack, as a signal, radios primed to guide her in. Men aboard the ship watched the sky with binoculars, their ears pressed to headsets, prepared to catch her voice from the ether. The plan was simple in design, impossible in practice. Amelia would fly eastward, Noonan would keep the plane on course, using celestial navigation, and the Itasca would transmit signals to guide them to their pinpoint destination. The world held its breath. The flight in the first hours, all seemed well. Radio reports trickled in from the Electra. Brief messages of progress, coordinates, confidence. The plane was holding its course, its engines steady. Amelia's voice carried through the static calm, professional, betraying none of the enormity pressing upon her. But, as the day stretched on, tension grew. Over the Pacific, navigation was a cruel science. Clouds often obscured the stars and the sun, robbing Noonan of his tools. Winds shifted invisibly, pushing planes off course without warning. A tiny error, magnified over thousands of miles, meant catastrophe, and radio, the fragile thread binding Amelia to the Itasca, was fickle, unpredictable, almost mocking. Messages were received, then lost. Static swallowed words whole. Frequencies slipped. Sometimes Amelia's voice came through faint and broken. Other times she seemed not to hear the ship's replies at all. Still, the Electra pressed on. Hours ticked by. Fuel burned away. The Pacific stretched endlessly beneath them. The final messages as morning turned to late morning. The tension aboard the Itasca rose to panic. The ship's radio operators leaned into their headsets, straining for any sound. And then her voice. Amelia came through the static. "We are on the line, 157337. We are running north and south." It was cryptic, almost desperate. A pilot's code, not a plea. It meant that she believed she was flying along the navigational line that should intersect with Howland Island, but she could not see it. It meant she was searching. Other transmissions were fainter. "We must be on you, but cannot see you." And then, "We are running low on fuel." The men aboard the Itasca scrambled. They sent plumes of black smoke into the sky, hoping she might see it. They transmitted again and again. but it seemed Amelia could not hear them. The radio was a one-way street. Her voice reached them, but their answers never reached her. The final message came just after 8:40 a.m. Amelia's voice was still calm, still strong, but tinged with urgency. "We are on the line 157,337. Then, silence. The airwaves went dead. The Electra vanished into the horizon, never to be heard from again. The silence that followed at first, no one wanted to believe it. The Itasca searched frantically, scouring the waters near Howland Island, engines churning, men scanning with binoculars. They expected to see her silver plane descending, to hear the whine of engines breaking the silence of the ocean sky. But there was nothing, not a shadow, not a ripple. The Itasca transmitted endlessly, into the void. "KHAQQ, come in. This is Itasca." But there was no reply, only static. Back on land, news spread slowly, then all at once. Radios across America buzzed with confusion. Newspapers rushed to print headlines. Families gathered by their sets, listening for updates. 4 hours, hope lingered. Surely she had landed on another island. Surely she had survived. Surely the world's most famous pilot could not simply vanish. But as hours became days, and days became weeks, the hope began to collapse under the weight of silence. The greatest female aviator of her time had disappeared into the Pacific. The search begins. The U.S. Navy launched one of the most massive search efforts in its history. Battleships, aircraft carriers, reconnaissance planes, an armada of steel combed the Pacific waters. Thousands of men scoured thousands of miles, their eyes scanning the blue emptiness for any trace, a floating wing, a piece of debris, a body. But the ocean gave up nothing. The Pacific was vast, endless, merciless. The sea swallowed secrets whole, and whatever fate had befallen Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan, it was buried beneath its waves. The search continued for weeks. Some believed she had simply run out of fuel, the Electra plunging into the ocean, sinking within minutes. Others thought she had veered off course, landed on some remote, uncharted island, perhaps still alive, waiting for rescue. But rescue never came. By the end of July, the search was called off. The ships returned to port. The headlines shifted. The world was left with a question that has never been answered. What happened to Amelia Earhart? Her final flight was not just an end, but the beginning of a mystery, a silence that has echoed across generations, haunting historians, aviators, and dreamers alike. In the Pacific, somewhere between Ley and Howland, a legend was swallowed by the sea, and silence became her legacy. Chapter 6. The world reacts. Shock, sorrow, and speculation. The silence over the Pacific had barely settled when the world erupted in disbelief. Amelia Earhart, the most famous female pilot in history, had disappeared into the sky, and the idea was unthinkable. Newspapers struggled to find words. Radios carried frantic bulletins. Crowds gathered in homes, diners, train stations, anywhere a broadcast could be heard, clinging to the hope that news of her rescue would arrive at any moment. But hour by hour, that hope withered. What had begun as a daring final leg of Around the World journey became something darker, a collective wound, a public obsession, and one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century. A nation in shock in America, the disappearance struck with the force of tragedy. Amelia was more than a pilot. She was a symbol of courage, progress, and the boundless possibilities of human ambition. She was admired by presidents, beloved by ordinary citizens, and idolized by women who saw in her a promise of freedom beyond traditional roles. When word spread that she was missing, disbelief turned to shock, then grief. Newspapers printed extra editions. Headlines screamed in bold letters, "Amelia Earhart, missing in Pacific. World's heroine feared lost at sea. Search underway for aviatrix and navigator Noonan." Reporters rushed to Ley, to Howland, to Washington, to the homes of Amelia's family and friends. Crowds stood outside radio stores, their faces pressed against the glass, listening to updates piped from speakers inside. Everywhere, one question echoed: where is Amelia? George Putnam's vigil in New York, Amelia's husband, George Putnam, became the center of attention. A publisher by profession, he was no stranger to publicity. But now he found himself at the heart of a nightmare he could not control. Putnam clung to hope, refusing to believe his wife was gone. He insisted she had survived, perhaps stranded on a small island, awaiting rescue. He worked tirelessly, coordinating with officials, speaking to the press, demanding that the search continue. But behind the public determination, friends described him as broken, haunted, his face lined with exhaustion. He barely slept. He barely ate. His life had become a countdown of radio updates and telegrams, each one stretching hope thinner to him. Amelia was not just a symbol, but the woman he loved. And as the days passed, the silence became unbearable. The public's mourning America, people grieved as though they had lost someone in their own family. In Kansas, where Amelia had grown up, towns held vigils. In schools, children drew pictures of airplanes, whispering prayers for the woman who had dared to chase the horizon. Women's organizations issued statements, hailing Amelia as a pioneer who had proved that women could equal men in courage and achievement. For many, she was a feminist icon decades ahead of her time. Radio announcers spoke in somber tones. Columnists wrote eulogies, disguised as reports. Some called her the Queen of the Air, others, the American Joan of Arc. And always, the question lingered: could she still be alive? Speculation takes hold when facts are few. Imagination takes their place. And with Amelia's disappearance, speculation filled the void left by silence. Some believed she had ditched at sea, the Electra sinking quickly beneath the waves, leaving no trace. Others clung to the hope she had found an island, living now as a castaway, waiting for rescue. Still others, distrustful of official explanations, whispered of conspiracy. Had she been on a secret mission for the U.S. government, perhaps, spying on Japanese holdings in the Pacific? Had she been captured, held prisoner on a remote island? The mystery grew, feeding on uncertainty. Each theory was like tinder tossed into a fire, fueling the world's obsession. The search expands in the Pacific. The U.S. Navy and Coast Guard intensified their search. The aircraft carrier, USS Lexington, joined the effort, along with destroyers and reconnaissance planes. The operation cost millions, one of the most expensive searches of its time. But the ocean gave nothing back. Planes flew over thousands of miles, their shadows sweeping across empty waves. Ships scanned the horizon, their crews weary with disappointment. Each day ended the same: no sighting, no debris, no clue to the searchers. It was as though the Electra had been erased from existence. The rest of the world watches. The disappearance was not just an American tragedy. It was global. In Europe, headlines in Paris, London, and Berlin chronicled each development. In Japan, newspapers speculated on whether Amelia had strayed into their territory. In Australia, people followed the story with a mixture of sorrow and awe, mindful that the Pacific stretched across their doorstep. She had been, after all, a citizen of the world, a woman whose fame transcended borders, and now her loss was felt everywhere. The symbol and the human as days turned 2 weeks. Amelia became less of a person and more of a legend. Magazines published photographs of her in flight gear, her smile confident, her gaze steady. They printed her quotes, words about courage, about chasing dreams, about defying odds. These words, once inspiration, now read like prophecy. But those who knew her struggled with the gap between public symbol and private grief. Her family remembered the girl from Kansas who had loved books and long walks. Her friends recalled the laughter, the warmth, the ordinary kindnesses that rarely made the headlines. To them, the world's obsession felt both comforting and cruel. They knew Amelia as human. The world now knew her as myth, a void filled by mystery. By August 1937, the official search was called off. Ships returned to port. Aircraft returned to bases. The Navy declared there was no hope of finding her. But the story did not end. It only transformed. The disappearance of Amelia Earhart became not just a tragedy, but a puzzle, a riddle the world could not solve. And like all great mysteries, it endured because of what it lacked: closure. With no wreckage, no body, no final proof, people could believe what they wanted. Hope lingered. Suspicion thrived. Theories multiplied. Amelia Earhart had flown into the Pacific and into legend, the beginning of an obsession for some. The story of Amelia's disappearance ended with grief, but for others, it was only the beginning. Historians, adventurers, and conspiracy theorists would spend decades chasing answers across the Pacific, convinced that the mystery could be solved. Some would find artifacts, others would invent stories. All would be driven by the same haunting truth. Amelia Earhart vanished, and no one knows where, in the quiet left by her absence. The world filled the silence with its own voice of sorrow, of speculation, of endless questions, and thus, her disappearance became not just a loss, but a legend. Chapter 7. Theories take flight. What really happened? The Pacific Ocean had swallowed Amelia Earhart, but not her story. In the absence of wreckage, or remains, imagination took flight. Theories multiplied, each one insisting it held the key to the riddle. Some were grounded in evidence, others in rumor, and still others in fantasy. But all shared one thing: the conviction that the world could not simply accept that. Amelia Earhart had vanished without a trace. In the years that followed, the mystery would evolve from tragedy into obsession. Historians, adventurers, scientists, and conspiracy theorists would clash in their efforts to explain what happened on that fateful July morning. This is the chapter where fact and speculation blur, where reason meets obsession, where the search for truth becomes almost as legendary as Amelia herself. The official explanation, lost at sea. The simplest theory is also the one most widely accepted by officials. Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan ran out of fuel, crashed into the Pacific, and sank. According to this explanation, their Lockheed Electra, unable to find Howland Island and running low on gas, was forced down somewhere in the vast ocean. The aircraft would have shattered on impact, sinking quickly in deep waters. The U.S. Navy supported this conclusion after their exhaustive search yielded nothing. For decades, official reports listed Amelia and Fred as lost at sea. And yet, for many, this explanation felt too simple, too unsatisfying, too final. Could such a daring, historic flight end with nothing more than an invisible grave beneath the waves? The public wasn't ready to believe it, and so, the theories began. The castaway theory, the island called Nikumararuni, of the most enduring possibilities, is that Amelia and Fred did not sink at sea, but landed, or crash-landed, on a remote island in the Phoenix Islands chain, specifically Gardner Island, now known as Nikumaroro. This theory suggests that Amelia, low on fuel, missed Howland Island, but spotted land nearby. She may have glided down, managing to bring the Electra to rest on the reef's edge. From there, she and Fred would have survived as castaways, waiting for rescue that never came. In the 1940s, British officials on the island discovered skeletal remains, along with a woman's shoe, a sextant box, and other objects. At the time, the bones were examined and dismissed as belonging to a man, but later studies, decades later, suggested they could very well have been Amelia's. Organizations, such as TIA, the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, have spent years researching this theory. They've found artifacts, fragments of aircraft aluminum, tools modified in ways that suggest survival, and even pieces of glass from what might have been Amelia's cosmetic jars. The idea is haunting. Amelia Earhart, stranded on a deserted island, her voice calling out on makeshift radios as the world searched too far away. Alone, forgotten, waiting. The Japanese capture theory. A prisoner of Warren. Other theory takes us into darker territory. Some believe that Amelia Earhart did not crash at sea, nor land on a deserted island, but was instead captured by the Japanese. According to this version, she strayed far off course, landing in the Marshall Islands, which were under Japanese control at the time. From there, stories diverge. Some claim she was imprisoned as a spy, interrogated, and ultimately executed. Others suggest she lived out her days in captivity. Her fate, a closely guarded secret of wartime intelligence, in the years following her disappearance. Scattered witnesses in the Pacific claim to have seen a foreign woman matching Amelia's description in Japanese custody. A few even insisted they had spoken to her. American intelligence at the time investigated these stories, but found no proof. And yet, the whispers persisted. Books and documentaries would later amplify this theory, feeding the suspicion that the U.S. government knew more than it admitted. For those unwilling to believe, Amelia simply vanished. This theory offered a more dramatic, if grim, explanation. The Tokyo Rose theory, Amelia in disguise from the Japanese capture theory. An even stranger rumor grew, that Amelia Earhart was forced to serve as Tokyo Rose, the infamous voice of Japanese propaganda. Broadcasts during World War II. Listeners to these broadcasts, which aimed to demoralize Allied soldiers, sometimes claimed the woman's voice sounded eerily like Amelia's. Of course, this theory has been thoroughly debunked. Several women who served as Tokyo Rose were later identified, none of them Amelia. Yet the persistence of this rumor shows how deeply the public longed to keep her alive in some form, even in the strangest of roles. The New Jersey theory, Amelia came home then there, is perhaps the most bizarre of all theories. That Amelia Earhart survived, returned to the United States under a false identity, and lived quietly for decades. This theory centers on a woman named Irene Bolam, a New Jersey banker who, in the 1970s, was accused of being the legendary aviator in disguise. Controversial. Book claimed that Bolam's features matched Amelia's, and that her mysterious past could only be explained if she were the missing pilot. Bolam, outraged, sued the publisher and won. She denied the accusation firmly, and subsequent analysis debunked the claim. And yet, the rumor endures, whispered in the corners of conspiracy circles. The power of the unknown. Each theory, from the official to the outlandish, reveals something deeper about the mystery. The truth is, people struggle to accept unresolved endings. A woman as extraordinary as Amelia Earhart could not simply vanish. She had to have been captured, or survived, or hidden away. Anything was better than nothing. In this way, the theories themselves became part of her legacy. They transformed her disappearance into not just a tragedy, but a myth. The search for evidence for decades. Expeditions would scour the Pacific, hunting for proof. Sonar scans of the seafloor. Archaeological digs on islands. Interviews with long-dead witnesses. Theories tested, disproven, revived. Each discovery, a piece of metal, a set of bones, a photograph was hailed as the answer, only to dissolve under scrutiny. The Pacific, vast and merciless, kept its secret well. Why the mystery endures. The truth about Amelia Earhart may never be known. Perhaps she rests at the bottom of the sea, her plane entombed in silence. Perhaps her bones lie scattered on a remote island, worn by time. Perhaps the stranger theories hold some hidden grain of truth. But what keeps the mystery alive is not just what we don't know, it's what Amelia represents. She was a symbol of daring, of defiance, of chasing the impossible. And her disappearance, unsolved and unyielding, mirrors the very spirit of her life. She lived in pursuit of mystery, and in the end, she became one. The curtain between fact and legend. As the decades passed, Amelia Earhart ceased to be only a person. She became a legend, draped in shadows, suspended between fact and myth. Each theory is a reflection of our own hopes and fears. Do we see her as a victim, lost to the sea? As a survivor, clinging to life on a deserted shore? As a prisoner, caught in the tides of war? Or as a ghost who walked among us, hidden in plain sight? The answer remains beyond reach. But the asking of the question, that is what keeps Amelia's story alive. Chapter 8. The Pacific's Secrets. Searching the deep. The Pacific Ocean, a place of beauty, vastness, and deathly silence. It stretches farther than the eye can ever imagine, a liquid desert so wide that even the bravest explorers have called it endless. It is here, in this immense and merciless wilderness of water, that Amelia Earhart disappeared. If the sea did indeed claim her, then somewhere beneath the waves lies her Lockheed Electra, the most sought-after wreck in aviation history. And yet, despite decades of searching, no one has ever laid eyes on it. The Pacific guards its secrets. Well, this chapter takes us into the darkness below the surface, into the modern hunts that have sought to solve the riddle. It is a story of sonar scans and robotic submarines, of dreams and disappointments, a story where every expedition is haunted by the same hope, that one day, the ocean will give Amelia back. The ocean, a graveyard without markers. The Pacific Ocean is not just large, it is monstrous. At its deepest, in the Mariana Trench, it plunges nearly 36,000 feet, deeper than Mount Everest is tall. Even in areas closer to Howland Island, the seafloor drops thousands of feet almost immediately. Searching for a single aircraft in this watery abyss is like looking for a single grain of sand in a desert the size of continents. The currents shift, storms churn, and time corrodes. What may have sunk intact could now be scattered across miles. This immensity is why, despite all human ingenuity, Amelia Earhart's plane has never been found, but that has never stopped the search. The Navy's first hunting, 1937, immediately after Amelia's disappearance. The U.S. Navy launched what was then the most extensive sea search in history. Battleships, destroyers, and aircraft scoured the ocean for more than 2 weeks. Covering over 250,000 square miles, they found nothing, no floating debris, no oil slick, no sign that Amelia Earhart had ever passed that way. It was the first reminder of the ocean's cruelty in the Pacific. Even the largest search could vanish into nothingness. The search resurfaces. Technology enters the hunt decades later. As technology advanced, new attempts were made. Sonar imaging, deep-sea robots, advanced mapping systems. Each new expedition promised to succeed where the last had failed. And yet, each returned empty. Handed. In the 2000s, groups funded by wealthy backers poured millions into deep-sea exploration. Oceanographers mapped areas near Howland Island with precision never before possible. Still, nothing. The seafloor remained silent. The Lockheed Electra, if it is there at all, lies hidden in a graveyard without markers. The allure of some searched the deep, others turned to the land, specifically the island of Nikla, Maroro. Here, expeditions unearthed bones, glass bottles, a fragment of aircraft aluminum. Each discovery sparked headlines. Had Amelia been found? But analysis was always inconclusive. Skeptics argue that the island's artifacts are just debris from other sources, shipwrecks, settlers, discarded refuse. Believers insist otherwise, that each fragment whispers of Amelia's desperate fight to survive. The truth remains contested. The ocean's reluctance. Why? Has no one found her? The answer lies partly in science, partly in mystery. The Pacific is restless. Wreckage does not sit still. Tides shift it. Storms scatter it. Metal corrodes. Coral consumes. In only a few years, an aircraft can vanish into the seafloor as if it never existed. If Amelia's Electra sank in deep water, It may now be so degraded that even a discovery would be no more than twisted metal, unrecognizable except by its shape. And yet, for searchers, even that would be enough. Expeditions of hope and failure, one after another. Expeditions have tried. Private explorers, funded research teams, even billionaires driven by curiosity. Each journey begins with optimism and ends with empty maps. In 2012, an expedition claimed to have captured sonar images of an object resembling a plane off the coast of Nikumaroro. The news made headlines worldwide, but later, analysis revealed nothing conclusive. The sea had once again mocked human ambition, and yet, failure has never stopped the dream, the human need for closure. Why do we keep searching? Why, after nearly a century, does the world still pour time and money into the Pacific, chasing a ghost? Because humans crave endings. We fear the unresolved. We need to know. For Amelia Earhart, the absence of an answer is unbearable. Her legend demands a conclusion, and so long as the Pacific refuses, we continue to dive into its depths, driven not only by history, but by obsession. The ocean is a character in Amelia's story. The Pacific is not just a setting, it is a character, a living, breathing force, a thief that stole her, a keeper of secrets, a giant with no mercy. Each wave whispers of her flight. Each storm feels like a reminder of what was lost. Each empty sonar scan is the ocean's cruel laughter. Perhaps the Pacific does not want us to find her. Perhaps the mystery is its offering to time, that some stories must remain incomplete. The search continues even today. The hunt goes on. New technology promises breakthroughs. Drones that can map the seafloor with unprecedented detail. Submarines that can dive deeper. AI that can analyze sonar patterns more quickly. Perhaps one day, someone will find the Electra, resting quietly in the deep. Perhaps one day, Amelia will be brought back into the light. Until then, the Pacific keeps her, a symbol in the depths. For now, Amelia Earhart remains more than a lost pilot. She is a symbol of daring, of tragedy, of the limits of human power against nature. The Pacific may hold her body, her plane, her last moments, but what it cannot contain is her story. That belongs to us, still searching, still asking, still haunted. Amelia Earhart vanished into the ocean, but the ocean has never given her back. And so, the mystery lives on. Chapter 9. Echoes of Amelia. The voices that called out in the days and weeks after Amelia Earhart vanished into the Pacific. The world was gripped by more than silence. There were whispers, voices, faint transmissions crackling across the airwaves. Messages that seemed to carry across the ocean itself. Were they real? Were they Amelia? Or were they illusions? Echoes born of static, imagination, and desperation. This is the story of the phantom signals, the cries for help that may have been Amelia's last attempt to reach the living. It is also the story of how those voices shaped the search, fed the legend, and left behind a chilling question. Did we hear Amelia Earhart calling from her watery grave? The age of radio, a lifeline in the sky. By 1937, aviation was still a new frontier. Pilots did not yet fly with the digital precision of today. They relied on maps, compasses, and fragile radio equipment that often worked only when the atmosphere allowed. Amelia's Lockheed Electra carried a radio transmitter and receiver. It was her link to the ground, to the Coast Guard, to the outside world. But it was also fickle, plagued by atmospheric interference, mismatched frequencies, and the crude limits of the era's technology. Her fate would hinge on those signals. The last confirmed transmission at 8:43 a.m. on July 2, 1937. Amelia's voice crackled through the radio waves. We are on the line 157 to 337. We are running north and south. It was the last confirmed transmission heard by the Coast Guard cutter Itasca, stationed near Howland Island. The words were strained, uncertain, filled with the weight of exhaustion. After that, silence. But perhaps not for long. The phantom calls begin in the hours and days after Amelia's disappearance. Radio operators around the Pacific and across the United States reported something strange. They claimed to hear weak signals, garbled words, distress calls drifting through the static. Some swore they heard Amelia's voice pleading for help. Others caught only fragments, mysterious tones that seemed to vanish as quickly as they came. Could her plane, stranded on a reef or shallow atoll, have continued transmitting? The idea was tantalizing. If true, it meant Amelia and Noonan had survived, at least for a time. The world listens. News of the phantom signals spread quickly. Newspapers across America blared headlines. Earhart's voice heard, stranded, on island. Amateur radio operators tuned in from their homes, straining to catch whispers from the Pacific. Families gathered around sets, listening to the hiss and crackle, hoping for a miracle. In a time before television, radio was not just entertainment. It was lifeblood, a direct line to events unfolding in real time. And now, it seemed, the missing aviatrix herself was speaking through it, reports of words or illusions. Some listeners claimed to hear Amelia distinctly, words like help, south, ship, and injured. Others swore they heard Fred Noonan, weak and slurred, possibly wounded. And yet, most of the so-called messages were faint, broken, barely audible. Were they genuine cries, or the human mind forcing meaning onto static? Radio scientists warned of wishful hearing, a phenomenon where listeners, desperate for clarity, imagine words that aren't truly there. But could so many independent operators all be imagining the same thing? The Navy takes note at first. The U.S. Navy dismissed the reports as fantasy, but as more and more people claimed to hear Amelia's voice, the Navy was forced to reconsider. Search planes and ships were redirected, based on the supposed coordinates given in transmissions. Entire fleets moved because of voices on the wind. Each time, they found nothing. The ocean remained mute, the creeping darkness of doubt. The longer the search dragged on, the more desperate the signals became, at least according to those who claimed to hear them. Some operators described anguished cries. Others heard silence punctuated by faint sobs. And then, just as suddenly as they began, the phantom transmissions stopped. After July 5th, there was nothing. Only the vast, eternal quiet of the Pacific. Had the Electra's batteries died? Had the tide swallowed the plane? Had Amelia's voice been silenced for good? Decades of controversy even today. The phantom signals divide historians. Skeptics argue that none of them were real, that the frequencies were impossible, the distances too great, the equipment too primitive. They insist the so-called calls were merely coincidental radio noises twisted into fantasy by a world desperate to believe. Amelia was alive, but others point out the consistency of the reports. Dozens of operators, across thousands of miles, all claimed to hear the same thing, in the same period. Could coincidence explain that? The truth remains suspended. Like Amelia's last words on the radio, caught between certainty and mystery. The haunting legacy of the calls, whether real or imagined. The phantom transmissions left an indelible mark. They fed the belief that Amelia did not perish instantly, that she survived, stranded and alone, calling out into the void that this possibility transforms her story from sudden tragedy to prolonged suffering. It means her end was not instant, but slow, desperate, and unheard. Perhaps that is the cruelest twist of all, not that she vanished, but that she may have begged for rescue, and the world heard her, yet could not reach her in time. Echoes that never-faded day. When researchers revisit Amelia's disappearance, they return to the phantom signals again and again. The transmissions are like ghostly fingerprints, evidence both tantalizing and uncertain. Were they Amelia's final attempt to pierce the silence? Or were they illusions, false hope broadcast into the night? We may never know. But the thought that Amelia's voice once drifted across the static, weak but defiant, is enough to haunt us. A reminder that sometimes, history's ghosts do not stay silent. They call out, and we, straining to listen, can only wonder what we truly heard. Chapter 10. Theories take flight. Legends and lies. When the last echoes of Amelia Earhart's voice faded into static, the world was left with silence. But silence never lasts. In its place came speculation, rumors, explanations that stretched from the plausible to the bizarre. In the years and decades that followed her disappearance, Amelia's fate became less a mystery to be solved and more a canvas for human imagination. Each theory reflected not only the facts of her vanishing, but the fears, hopes, and obsessions of the age. Some theories sought truth, others sought comfort, and still others, perhaps, sought to use her name for power and control. This is the story of how a vanished pilot became a legend, stitched together by conjecture, myth, and lies. The crash-and-sink theory, the simplest theory, emerged first. Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan, lost and low on fuel, simply crashed into the Pacific. The sea, vast and merciless, swallowed them whole. This explanation seemed logical. It fit the last confirmed transmission. It matched the inability of the Navy to locate landfall near Howland Island. But for some, the simplicity of the crash-and theory was unsatisfying. Could history's most famous aviatrix truly vanish so completely without leaving even a trace of wreckage? The ocean gave no answer, and so imagination filled the void. The Gardner Island hypothesis. Soon whispers turned to Gardner Island, now called Nick. This desolate atoll lay not far from Amelia's flight path. Some researchers claimed that if Amelia missed Howland, she might have turned southward, searching for land, and found herself upon Gardner. In the 1940s, bones were reportedly discovered on the island, bones later declared to belong to a European woman. Alongside them were remnants of a campfire, a woman's shoe, and a sextant box. Had Amelia survived the crash, only to be marooned upon an empty island, awaiting rescue that never came? This theory chilled the imagination, for it suggested not instant death, but slow decay, a slow fading into the sand and sun. The world, oblivious to her plight, captured by the Japanese. Then came the darker stories. By the late 1930s, tensions in the Pacific were rising. Japan's empire stretched across the ocean. Could Amelia, flying into their waters, have been captured? Some claimed she was taken prisoner by the Japanese military, suspected of espionage. Stories told of her suffering in captivity, of Noonan executed, of Amelia dying alone on Saipan. These rumors grew so powerful that after World War II, American investigators traveled to the island to search for graves, relics, or testimony. They found only fragments, villagers' stories of a foreign woman held by the Japanese, whispers of bones buried in unmarked ground. Nothing conclusive. Yet the story endured, fueled by the shadow of war and the hunger for conspiracy. The Tokyo Rose myth. The legend twisted further in the 1940s with the tale of Tokyo Rose, the name given to Japanese women who broadcast propaganda to American troops during the war. Some insisted that Amelia Earhart herself had been forced into this role. Her familiar voice carried across enemy radio waves. It was a haunting idea. Amelia, not dead, but alive, her voice used against her own nation. There is no evidence this was true. Yet for a world grieving its lost icon, the thought was impossible to resist. The spy theories, still darker theories, suggested Amelia had never been a victim at all, but a participant in a secret mission. Was her world flight a cover for espionage? Some whispered. Did she carry hidden cameras to map Japanese islands for the U.S. military? Others claimed she never vanished at all, but returned to America under a false name. Her disappearance staged for political purposes. One story even alleged that she lived out her days in obscurity as a housewife in New Jersey. the outlandishness of these tales mattered little. Once Amelia became myth, the boundary between truth and fantasy blurred beyond recognition. The human need for theories. Why did so many legends grow from Amelia's disappearance? Perhaps because the human mind cannot endure a void. We crave answers, even when none exist. A body lost at sea, a plane swallowed whole. Such finality feels incomplete. Instead, we weave stories. Each theory reflects a different desire. The crash and sink theory satisfies reason. The Gardner Island hypothesis satisfies tragedy. The Japanese capture story satisfies suspicion. The spy myths satisfy conspiracy. Together, they form a kaleidoscope of possibilities, each more haunting than the last. The weight of legend for Amelia Earhart. The burden of mystery was both blessing and curse. On one hand, her story never ended. She lived on in speculation, her image preserved by the questions that refused to die. On the other hand, the truth of her life, her bravery, her achievements, her humanity, was sometimes eclipsed by the lurid appeal of rumor. She was no longer just a pilot. She was a ghost, a prisoner, a spy, a martyr. She was everything and nothing all at once. The lies that take root. Some lies grew so deeply into culture that they became nearly inseparable from history. Even now, decades later, documentaries repeat them, books expand upon them, and imaginations ignite with their flame. It is as though Amelia's disappearance gave birth not to one story, but to dozens of overlapping realities. In one, she died instantly. In another, she survived. In yet another, she lived in secret until old age. The truth, silent beneath the waves, is drowned by the chorus of possibilities. Theories, as a mirror of ourselves, in the end. The theories say as much about us as they do about Amelia. They reveal our longing for survival, our fear of enemies, our obsession with hidden truths. They show how myth can sprout from the soil of uncertainty, watered by time, nourished by imagination. And perhaps that is Amelia's final legacy. Not only the daring flights she made, but the countless versions of herself that history has created. Versions born from rumor, from lies, from hope. Versions that will never cease to haunt us. Chapter 11. The search that would not end. The Pacific Ocean is vast, an endless mirror of sky and water, stretching far beyond the imagination. To lose something within it, even something as large as an aircraft, is to consign it to an abyss. And yet, from the very moment Amelia Earhart vanished, the world refused to let go. The search for Amelia did not end with the silence of her final transmission. Instead, it became a relentless pursuit, spanning decades, drawing in governments, scientists, adventurers, and dreamers. Each believed they could be the ones to answer the question that had haunted the world since July 2, 1937. But the ocean does not give up its secrets easily. The first desperate search, immediately after Earhart's final radio call, the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard launched one of the largest search efforts in history. Battleships, aircraft carriers, and planes swept the seas. Over 250,000 square miles of ocean were scanned. Radio operators across the Pacific listened for stray signals. At first, hope lingered. Reports of faint radio transmissions came in, calls for help, fragmented messages. Some insisted they heard Amelia's voice crackling through the static. But radio waves travel strangely across the Pacific, bouncing and distorting. Many of these signals proved impossible to trace. Were they genuine cries for rescue, or merely the desperate wishes of those who wanted to believe? As days turned to weeks, and no trace of the plane or its crew was found, hope began to collapse. On July 19, 1937, the Navy officially called off the search. Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan were declared lost. But for the world, the story was only beginning. The private expeditions where governments surrendered, private citizens stepped in. Wealthy backers, amateur explorers, and die-hard admirers of Amelia launched expeditions into the Pacific. Some ventured to remote atolls, others dove into the depths. All returned empty-handed. Each failure only deepened the mystery, and each new expedition fanned the flames of public fascination. For some, the search was not just about Amelia. It was about proving the impossible could be solved. That determination could overcome even the Pacific itself. The Gardner Island clues in 1940. A British colonial officer reported something remarkable on Gardner Island: skeletal remains, a woman's shoe, and a sextant box. The bones were analyzed, but quickly dismissed as male. They were later lost. For decades, the story lingered like smoke, tantalizing, unconfirmed, unresolved. Then, in the late 20th and early 21st century, new scientific methods re-examined the data. Some experts argued that the bones, based on surviving measurements, may indeed have belonged to a woman of Amelia's build. Modern expeditions to the island found more fragments, broken bottles, bits of metal, traces of campfires. Nothing definitive, nothing certain. Yet the possibility remained. Had Amelia Earhart survived the crash, only to die marooned on a silent island, her cries unheard by the world? The endless ocean floor. Others looked downward, into the depths themselves. With sonar, submersibles, and high-tech equipment, search teams scoured the seafloor near Howland Island. The Pacific revealed only emptiness. Each scan cost millions. Each failure drew headlines. And still, the ocean gave nothing back. The mystery persisted, and with it, the myth grew stronger. The myth of sightings over the years. Reports surfaced of people who claimed to have seen Amelia after 1937. Villagers swore she had been in Japanese custody. A soldier claimed to have seen her executed. Others believed she had lived quietly in America, hidden in plain sight. The search became not only physical, but psychological, a hunt through rumors, memories, and fragments of human imagination. The obsession of researchers. For some, Amelia's disappearance was not just a puzzle. It became an obsession. Scholars dedicated their careers to her. Expeditions were launched repeatedly to Nkumaroro. Debates raged in journals, documentaries, and conferences. Each new clue, no matter how small, reignited the chase. A scrap of metal, a suspicious bone fragment, a photograph said to show her alive. Each was heralded as the breakthrough, then quietly dismissed. The search became eternal, an unending cycle of hope and disappointment. The ghost of the Pacific. In truth, the search for Amelia Earhart became less about finding her, and more about what she represented. She was not merely a missing pilot. She was a cultural icon, a woman who symbolized courage, independence, and defiance of limits. To find her remains would be to bring closure, but also to end the myth. And so, perhaps the ocean's silence is itself part of her legacy. For without answers, Amelia remains eternal. She exists not in one story, but in many. Lost aviator, stranded survivor, prisoner, spy, ghost. She lives wherever imagination dares to wander. The search continues not because we expect to find her, but because we cannot bear to let her go. The endless hunt. Heaven today. New searches launch every few years. High-tech sonar sweeps the Pacific floor. Archaeologists dig through coral and sand on nickel. DNA testing re-examines old bones. Each expedition ends the same, with headlines of possibility, followed by silence, and yet, another search always follows. It is as though Amelia Earhart is not missing in the Pacific, but forever just beyond the horizon, always almost found, never truly discovered. The search as legacy in the end. The endless search says less about Amelia Earhart's final flight, and more about humanity itself. We are creatures who cannot accept unanswered questions. We seek closure. We demand stories with endings. And when those endings do not exist, we invent them. Amelia Earhart's vanishing is not just history's mystery. It is history's mirror, reflecting our own refusal to let silence win. And so, the search will never end. not because we believe we will find her, but because we cannot accept that she is gone. Chapter 12. Echoes in Popular Culture. Amelia Earhart disappeared into the Pacific Ocean in 1937. Yet in many ways, she never truly vanished. If anything, her absence gave birth to a presence even greater than her living fame. For decades, the world has not only remembered Amelia Earhart, but reinvented her, transforming her into a symbol, a legend, and a myth woven into the very fabric of popular culture. The first wave of immortality in the days immediately following her disappearance. Newspapers filled their pages with her face. Headlines screamed of hope, despair, and mystery. And when the search ended without answers, Amelia did not fade into silence. She entered a new life in print, film, and imagination. Hollywood was quick to seize the fascination. Films loosely inspired by her life appeared in the 1930s and 40s, with actresses portraying daring women pilots who mirrored Amelia's courage and charm. These weren't exact biographies. They were cultural echoes. Cinematic homages to the woman who dared the impossible. To a world reeling from the Great Depression and inching toward World War. Amelia represented not only adventure, but resilience. Her face became a reminder that greatness could be achieved, even by those society underestimated. The feminist icon. As the decades passed, Amelia's story became more than an aviation tale. She became an icon for women's rights, a beacon of independence in a century where women were still fighting for equality. Her image appeared in books, posters, and campaigns. Biographies framed her as not just a pilot but a symbol of freedom, a woman who challenged gender roles and lived life on her own terms. For every girl who dreamed of more than tradition allowed, Amelia was proof that boundaries could be broken. That endless retellings be the 1960s and 70s. Earhart's name had moved beyond aviation circles into the wider landscape of cultural memory. Novels speculated about her fate. Television programs recreated her final flight. Documentaries explored every theory, from crash and sink to secret spy missions. Her mystery became a genre in itself, half history, half folklore. She was spoken of in the same breath as Atlantis, the Bermuda Triangle, and other enigmas that fascinated humanity. The shadow of conspiracy theories about Amelia's disappearance grew. Popular culture followed. Magazines and late-night radio programs leaned into sensational stories. Amelia, captured by the Japanese. Amelia, living under an alias. Amelia as a government spy. Some of these tales bordered on the absurd, yet the more fantastical they became, the more they captured the imagination of a public that craved mystery. To this day, these theories echo in podcasts, books, and television specials. They have made Amelia not just a historical figure but a character in a global mythos of lost explorers and unsolved riddles. Amelia in literature. Authors found endless ways to weave Amelia into their work. Some created fictionalized retellings of her life. Others placed her into worlds of fantasy, imagining her surviving on islands, flying beyond the horizon, or slipping into alternate realities. Poets invoked her name as a symbol of freedom. Novelists crafted characters inspired by her determination. In literature, Amelia Earhart became not only who she was, but what she represented, the eternal quest for discovery. Amelia, on screen, in film and television. Amelia has appeared again and again. From documentaries to dramas, from archival footage to reenacted scenes, her presence is inescapable. She was portrayed by Hilary Swank in Amelia 2009, bringing her story to a new generation. She even appeared in lighter forms, as a playful character in Night at the Museum, Battle of the Smithsonian 2009, showing how far she had entered the cultural imagination. Her face has been animated in cartoons, referenced in comedies, and honored in historical series. Amelia Earhart became not just history, but entertainment, forever resurfacing in the world's storytelling. Songs of the Sky musicians, too, found inspiration in her legacy. Ballads and folk songs mourned her loss. Rock bands referenced her courage. Each lyric carried her further into the realm of myth. A voice carried on the wind like her last flight. The music was not about Amelia as a person, but Amelia as a symbol of flight, of freedom, of mystery, a brand beyond death. Her name became more than memory. It became a brand. Schools, airports, scholarships, and organizations took her name. Amelia Earhart became synonymous with adventure, progress, and courage. For women entering aviation, scholarships bearing her name offered both financial support and symbolic strength. For airports and aviation clubs, her name lent heritage and pride. The woman who vanished in 1937 became larger in absence than she ever was in life. The eternal mystery as entertainment every decade brings new documentaries, new podcasts, new YouTube videos and Netflix specials revisiting Amelia's story. Each promises to solve the mystery. Each ends the same, with questions still unanswered. And yet, the cycle never fails. Her disappearance has become one of history's most marketable mysteries, a story that continues to sell because it will likely never be fully solved. Amelia Earhart became both a pioneer and a product, remembered, revered, and forever retold. The symbol that outlived the person in truth. Amelia Earhart's echo in popular culture says less about who she was and more about what humanity needs her to be. We need icons. We need mysteries. We need stories that stretch beyond the ordinary and remind us that there is still something out there, something unexplained, something waiting beyond the horizon. Amelia Earhart became that story. Her image is not confined to 1937. It echoes in every retelling, every theory, every child who looks to the sky and dreams of flight. She is no longer just a person. She is a legend, and legends do not disappear. They only grow louder with time. Chapter 13. Theories of Survival. When Amelia Earhart's voice fell silent over the Pacific, the world was left not only with grief, but with a haunting question. What if she survived? The absence of wreckage, the absence of remains, and the abrupt vanishing created a vacuum. And into that vacuum, speculation rushed like a storm. Over the decades, countless theories of survival have emerged, whispered on radio waves, printed in books, dramatized in films, and traded in late-night conversations. These theories reveal more than just curiosity. They show humanity's refusal to let go of its heroes. This chapter explores those theories, one by one, not as confirmed truths, but as echoes of possibility. The castaway theory, perhaps the most haunting possibility, is also the simplest. Amelia and Fred Noonan survived the crash, but not the aftermath. According to this theory, their Lockheed Electra ran out of fuel and made a desperate landing on a remote atoll, possibly Gardner Island, now called Nikumaroro there. Surrounded by coral and silence, they may have lived as castaways, waiting for rescue that never came. Supporters of this theory point to fragments of evidence, pieces of aluminum believed to match the Electra, skeletal remains once dismissed but later reconsidered, stories from islanders of aircraft wreckage on the reef. It is a story, not of instant death, but of slow fading, a tale of survival without salvation, a haunting reminder that sometimes the worst fate is not the fall, but the waiting. The prisoner theory. Another darker idea imagines Amelia and Fred captured by the Japanese in the tense 1930s. The Pacific was a region of political rivalry and secret operations. Some believe Amelia strayed into Japanese-controlled territory, forced down on the Marshall Islands, and taken prisoner. Rumors swirled of American spies disguised as pilots, of classified missions cloaked as exploration. Witnesses later claimed to have seen a white woman and a man, strangers, on Pacific Islands under Japanese rule. Some swore Amelia was among them, according to this version. Amelia did not die in the air, but in captivity. Her fate buried under wartime secrecy. Two believers. The silence of governments was not ignorance but cover-up. The spy theory a twist on. The prisoner narrative goes further, that Amelia Earhart was not merely a victim of circumstance, but an active participant in espionage. The theory suggests that her around-the-world flight was a cover, a mission for the U.S. government to gather intelligence on Japanese positions in the Pacific. When her plane vanished, the story claims it was because she was caught. Her disappearance, then, was not tragedy, but consequence, the fate of a spy who flew too close to danger. There is little hard evidence, but the theory persists, fed by wartime secrecy and the allure of a hidden truth. The Tokyo Rose theory. Among the stranger survival tales is the idea that Amelia lived under an assumed identity, even as the infamous Tokyo Rose, the nickname given to Japanese women who broadcast propaganda during World War II. In this telling, she became not a pilot, not a prisoner, but a voice on enemy airwaves, luring American soldiers with songs and messages of despair. Historians largely dismiss the claim, yet it has found a home in folklore, the kind of story that lingers not because it is likely, but because it is unforgettable. The new life theory. Some insist Amelia survived, returned to the United States in secrecy, and chose a new identity to escape the pressures of fame. One name often linked to this tale is Irene Bolam, a New Jersey woman who, in the 1960s, was accused of being Amelia in disguise. Bolam denied it fiercely, even suing for damages. Yet the whispers continued, fueled by photographs and supposed resemblances. The theory asks us to imagine Amelia not as a lost explorer, but as a woman who chose obscurity over legend, living in plain sight, hiding in the shadow of her own ghost. The government's silence. What ties many of these theories together is not evidence, but absence. No wreckage, no bodies, no closure. And in that silence, conspiracy thrives. People ask, did governments know more than they admitted? Was the search truly exhaustive, or was it cut short for reasons unknown? To some, Amelia's story is not about aviation at all, but about trust, or the lack of it, in those who hold power. The psychology of survival theories. Why do survival theories endure? Perhaps because admitting death is too final. Heroes are not meant to vanish into nothing. Heroes are supposed to survive. To imagine Amelia alive, even in hardship, is to grant her a longer story, a human ending, not just a sudden silence. It reflects our own struggle with mortality. If Amelia could vanish yet live on, then perhaps we, too, can cheat the inevitable. The legacy of possibility. None of these theories, castaway, prisoner, spy, new identity, have been proven. Yet each has left its mark, shaping how Amelia is remembered. To some, she is a martyr to exploration. To others, a victim of war. To others still, a survivor who chose another life. In every version, she remains larger than death. Her fate is not only a question of history. It is a mirror of our imagination. Amelia Earhart may have disappeared into the Pacific, but in survival theories, she continues to live, not as a pilot lost, but as a ghost who refuses to land. Chapter 14. Legends of the Pacific. The Pacific Ocean is vast, timeless, and layered with myth. For centuries, its islands have carried tales of gods, wanderers, and mysteries swallowed by the sea. When Amelia Earhart disappeared over its horizon in 1937, her story naturally fused with this ancient tradition of legend-making. To the Pacific Islanders, Amelia was not just an aviator from faraway lands. She became part of their oral histories, woven into the folklore of communities that had lived with the mysteries of the sea for generations. Her vanishing was not a singular event. It was another chapter in the Pacific's eternal story of arrivals and disappearances. This chapter is not about wreckage or evidence, but about memory. About how Amelia Earhart became a legend of the Pacific. The sea that eats. Stories. The Pacific has always been more than water. For the island nations that call it home, it is a living presence, a giver of life, a taker of lives, and a keeper of secrets. Long before Amelia's electorate traced the sky, Polynesian navigators crossed these waters using only the stars, the currents, and the whispers of the wind. Their stories tell of travelers who vanished, swallowed by the ocean, but remembered in song. Amelia's disappearance fit seamlessly into this narrative. To the Pacific, she was not the first to vanish, nor would she be the last. The ocean had taken her, as it had taken countless before. And yet, unlike others, Amelia's name carried across the globe. Her loss was retold not just in island villages but in every city with a newspaper. She became the ocean's most famous secret. The Marshall Islands' testimony among the strongest legends are those from the Marshall Islands. Islanders tell stories of a plane coming down near Amelia Atoll, of foreign castaways, of strangers held by authorities. For years, these accounts were dismissed as folklore, but to the Marshallese, they were not myth, they were memory, passed down through generations. The story of the white woman and her navigator became part of their oral history. Children grew up hearing of the time the ocean brought two outsiders, only for them to vanish again into the shadow of empire and war. Whether true or not, the legend of Amelia lives on in those islands, not as conspiracy, but as heritage. The bones of Nikumarorun, the lonely reef of Nikumaroro. Stories also took root. In 1940, bones were reportedly discovered by a British colonial officer. At the time, they were dismissed as belonging to a man. Decades later, analysis suggested they might have been consistent with a woman of Amelia's build. For the people who later inhabited Nikumaroro, this became more than evidence. It became story. Whispered tales told of the white woman who may have perished there, her ghost lingering among the coconut palms. Today, when explorers visit the island in search of answers, they walk not only into a potential crash site, but into the mythology that has grown in its silence. The ocean as storyteller in the Pacific worldview. The ocean itself tells stories. Shipwrecks, lost navigators, and vanished aircraft are not mere accidents. They are dialogues with the sea. To those who live on its shores, Amelia Earhart's disappearance is not only history, but destiny. The sea claimed her, as it has claimed so many, but in taking her, it also transformed her. She is no longer only Amelia the pilot. She is Amelia the spirit of the sea, restless, eternal, a reminder of the ocean's power. Amelia as ancestor. Spiritan, some island traditions. Outsiders who vanish into the sea become part of the spirit world. Guardians, or warnings to those who follow. Amelia, in these tellings, did not simply vanish. She became an ancestor spirit, watching over future travelers, guiding or cautioning those who dared to cross the endless blue. This transformation from mortal to myth is not unique to Amelia. Yet hers is the most widely remembered, the foreign pilot who became a daughter of the ocean. Whispers of Warren, the years after her disappearance. As World War II swept across the Pacific, soldiers heard island tales of a woman prisoner, a mysterious flyer, a ghost of the sky. These whispers fused with wartime fears and suspicions. For many, Amelia's legend was no longer just a mystery, but part of the larger, darker mythology of conflict. In this way, her story became both local and global, an island myth retold through the lens of World War. Songs of loss in some islands. Amelia's story is remembered in song. Folk musicians wove her into laments about loss at sea, about the cruelty of distance, about loved ones who never return. For cultures where music is memory, these songs are more than entertainment. They are vessels, carrying Amelia's name across generations, ensuring her story is never forgotten. The tourist's tale in modern times. Amelia's legend has also become part of tourism. Visitors to Pacific Islands are told her story, guided to possible sites of her landing, and invited to imagine her final moments under the tropical sun. This, too, is a form of myth-making. Amelia is not only remembered by locals, but retold to outsiders. Her story reshaped with each telling, becoming part of the island's living identity. Myth as immortality. Perhaps the greatest truth is this: in the Pacific, Amelia Earhart never truly died. The ocean that may have claimed her also preserved her, embedding her name in story, song, and spirit. When the waves crash against coral reefs, when the stars guide sailors across the dark horizon, her legend is there, not only as a mystery unsolved, but as a myth reborn. Amelia Earhart set out to circle the globe. Instead, she became part of it, a legend of the Pacific, carried endlessly by the tides of memory. Chapter 15. Science and Search. When Amelia Earhart vanished in 1937, the immediate response was desperation. Planes, ships, and men fanned out across the Pacific, searching for a trace. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks into decades, the search did not end. It transformed. What began as a frantic rescue evolved into one of the longest, most persistent hunts in history, a scientific quest to solve a mystery hidden beneath sky and sea. From oceanographers to archaeologists, from government agencies to private enthusiasts, Amelia's disappearance became not just a tragedy, but a puzzle, and science was determined to crack it. This chapter explores the methods, the discoveries, and the enduring frustrations of that search. The first search. 1937. The very first effort was the most urgent. When Earhart's last transmission was received, the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard launched one of the largest peacetime search missions in history. The aircraft carrier, USS Lexington, destroyers, and aircraft swept across the Central Pacific. Over 250,000 square miles of ocean were combed. But the Pacific is unforgiving. Its vastness dwarfs even the most advanced fleets. No sign of Earhart, Noonan, or the Electra was found. After 2 weeks, the official search ended. The world was left with silence. Mapping the Pacific. The birth of theories in the aftermath. Maps of the Pacific became canvases of speculation. Scientists, navigators, and armchair detectives alike traced Earhart's final path, measuring fuel consumption, signal strength, and wind drift. Some concluded she must have ditched at sea, near Howland Island. Others argued she may have veered off course to Gardner Island. Science was already at work, not with wreckage, but with numbers, coordinates, and probabilities. The ocean as a graveyard. The central problem has always been the ocean itself. The Pacific is not only vast, it is deep. At its depths lie trenches miles below the surface, capable of swallowing entire aircraft without leaving a trace. Even today, with sonar and submersibles, locating a single plane in such waters is nearly impossible. For many, this is the simplest explanation. Earhart's Electra lies on the sea floor, beyond reach. A scientific truth, but also a poetic one, that the ocean keeps its secrets. The archaeologists of Nikumaroan, the late 20th century, attention turned to archaeologists and researchers from groups like the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery tire-mounted expeditions to the island. They found tantalizing clues, a piece of aluminum thought to match Earhart's plane remnants, of a woman's shoe, a sextant box, and even the remains of a campfire. The bones discovered in 1940 were reanalyzed decades later, using modern forensic techniques. Some studies suggested they could have been Amelia's. Others disagreed. Nikumaroro became a laboratory of speculation, where each artifact carried enormous weight. Was it debris from a castaway, or simply the leftovers of island life? Science could not say for certain. The technology of search as the decades passed. Technology transformed the hunt. Sonar mapping allowed researchers to scan the seafloor for metallic shapes. Deep-sea submersibles dove into dark trenches. Cameras searching for wreckage. Satellite imagery was analyzed for unusual patterns on coral reefs. DNA testing became a possibility for remains, though definitive samples were elusive. Each wave of technology brought hope. Each also brought disappointment. Private expeditions, and the age of obsession while governments moved on. Private groups, and wealthy individuals, kept the search alive. From the 1980s onward, expeditions became more frequent. Some were scientific, others sensational. Books and documentaries followed, each promising the answer. Yet the result was always the same: fragments, possibilities, but never certainty. The search itself became part of Amelia's legend, a quest that mirrored her own spirit of exploration. The psychology of the search. Why do people keep looking? Part of it is scientific curiosity, the desire to solve a mystery with data and evidence. But part of it is emotional. Amelia Earhart was not just any pilot. She was a symbol, a pioneer, a hero. To leave her story unfinished feels unacceptable. Each expedition is more than science. It is pilgrimage. To search for Amelia is to honor her modern breakthroughs in recent years. Breakthroughs have reignited interest. 2012, a sonar image off Nikumaroro appeared to show a possible aircraft shape. Debate raged, but proof was elusive. 2018, forensic analysis suggested the Nikumaroro bones were 99% likely to belong to Earhart. Critics challenged the methods. 2021 onward, new oceanic scans, using advanced submersibles, returned with more data, but no confirmation. Science edges closer. But the final answer remains just out of reach. The nature of the unsolved, perhaps. What keeps the search alive is not just the possibility of finding Amelia, but the power of not finding her. In an age when satellites map every inch of the globe, when technology pierces the deepest seas, Amelia's disappearance reminds us there are still mysteries left. It humbles us. It reminds us that even the greatest explorers can vanish. That science, for all its triumphs, still faces the unknown. The ongoing hunt as of today, the search has not ended. New technologies are being prepared, new expeditions planned. Every decade brings fresh hope that Amelia Earhart's plane will finally be found. And perhaps it will be. Perhaps someday, lying on a reef or buried in the sand, the Electra will reveal itself. Until then, Amelia's fate remains a scientific question unanswered, a mystery where history, technology, and human determination collide. In the end, the search for Amelia Earhart is more than archaeology or oceanography. It is a reflection of our deepest need to find meaning in loss, to uncover the truth behind silence, to believe that no mystery is beyond the reach of science. But for now, Amelia remains unfound, her story alive, her presence eternal, her name carried on every wave of the Pacific. Chapter 16. The cultural icon. When Amelia Earhart disappeared into the Pacific, her physical journey ended, but her symbolic journey, her transformation into an icon, had only just begun. In the decades that followed, Amelia did not fade. She multiplied. She became a legend, a myth, a cultural touchstone. Her image appeared in classrooms, her name in headlines, her story in novels and films. She was no longer just a pilot who vanished. She was a mirror of our ambitions, our fears, and our dreams. This chapter explores how Amelia Earhart became more than a person, how she became an idea, larger than life, and eternal. The immediate aftermath. A hero's shadow in 1937. When the news broke that Amelia was missing, the world reacted with disbelief. Newspapers ran daily updates. Children prayed for her safe return. Women and men alike watched the skies with a kind of collective grief. Almost instantly, her story shifted from fact to symbol. She was no longer only Amelia, the pilot. She was Amelia, the pioneer who dared the impossible, the woman who stood for progress, the dreamer who vanished into mystery. It was not just tragedy. It was myth in the making. The feminist icon Amelia Earhart rose to fame in a world where women were expected to stay grounded in the home. in traditional roles, away from danger. Her flights shattered those expectations. When she disappeared, her legend cemented her as more than an aviator. She became a feminist icon, a symbol of courage and independence. She was proof that women could stand shoulder to shoulder with men, not just in aviation, but in ambition itself. Generations of women looked to her as inspiration, from pilots to astronauts to leaders of every kind. In Amelia, they saw not loss, but possibility. Amelia, in wartime, during World War II, just years after her disappearance, Amelia's story took on new meaning. Soldiers carried her image as a reminder of bravery. Propaganda invoked her name as a symbol of American spirit. She became an emblem of resilience in a world collapsing into chaos. Even in absence, she was present. Books, films, and the storytellers. As decades passed, Amelia's story became a canvas for storytellers. Books reimagined her final flight. Movies portrayed her as daring, doomed, and mysterious. Documentaries retraced her steps, while fictional tales gave her secret lives. She was played by stars, written into poems, painted on murals. Her face, with its short hair and determined eyes, became instantly recognizable. Each retelling kept her alive, not as fact, but as legend. The icon of mystery, Amelia's disappearance, gave her a power few figures possess. The power of the unsolved. Unlike heroes whose stories end neatly, Amelia's story has no final chapter. That absence makes her eternal. She is not just remembered for what she did, but for what we cannot know. And in that uncertainty, she becomes a symbol not only of courage, but of mystery itself. The eternal human urge to ask, to wonder, to search. Amelia, and the space age 1 astronauts stepped onto the moon. Many invoked Amelia's name. She had been a bridge between the earth and the skies. Without her daring, without her example, the leap to space seemed less imaginable. NASA has honored her legacy repeatedly, framing her as part of the lineage that leads from flight to space exploration. To this day, female astronauts often name her as inspiration, the woman who proved that limits are only illusions. A symbol beyond borders. Amelia's story is not only American. It belongs to the world. From Africa to Asia, Europe to the Pacific, she is celebrated as a figure of human courage. Monuments stand in her honor. Schools bear her name. She is remembered not as a victim of geography, but as a citizen of the skies, a woman whose horizon was limitless. Amelia, in the 21st century, even today, Amelia Earhart remains a fixture in popular culture. Her image appears in advertisements, her story retold in documentaries, her face animated in television shows. Museums display her jacket, her flight gear, her photographs, objects that feel like relics of a saint. For modern audiences, she represents something rare, an icon who embodies both progress and mystery. The psychology of icon making. Amelia becomes such a powerful cultural icon. Partly, it was timing. She lived in an era when aviation was young, when heroes were made of flight. Partly, it was her character, her courage, her independence, her warmth, and partly, it was her ending. Vanishing without a trace turned her from history into myth. She became unfinished, and in that incompleteness, she became eternal. The dual image, courage and absence. Today, Amelia Earhart is remembered in two ways. As courage embodied, the woman who flew against the odds, who dared what others would not. As absence, eternal, the woman who vanished, leaving behind silence and wonder. Together, these two images create her icon. She is both strength and mystery, both presence and absence. Amelia Earhart did not choose to become a cultural icon, but history chose her. And in her vanishing, she became not less, but more. She became a story the world would never stop telling. Chapter 17. The human side behind the goggles, the headlines, and the myth. Amelia Earhart was a person. She laughed, worried, made mistakes, and carried hopes just like anyone else. Yet history often reduces her to a symbol, a mystery, in the sky. To understand her fully, we must peel back the legend and rediscover the woman. This chapter takes us into Amelia's personal life, her family, her friendships, her insecurities, and her dreams. For all her daring, she was human, and that is perhaps what makes her most extraordinary. The young dreamer Amelia was born in Atchison, Kansas, in 1897. As a child, she was adventurous, climbing trees, collecting insects, and refusing to accept limits. Yet she was also deeply sensitive, a girl who loved books and scribbled in journals. Her upbringing was unstable. Her father struggled with alcoholism, and the family moved often. These early hardships shaped Amelia's independence. She learned early not to rely too heavily on stability. She would carve her own path. In her letters, Amelia often spoke of feeling different from others, not content to follow tradition. That difference became the foundation of her daring spirit. Friendships and bonds. Amelia's circle was small, but meaningful. She maintained lifelong friendships, often corresponding through handwritten letters. One of her closest confidants was her sister, Muriel. The two shared secrets, laughter, and frustrations about society's expectations. Amelia's bond with Muriel grounded her, even as fame pulled her away. Her friends described her as warm, witty, and quick to smile, yet also private. Amelia gave much of herself to the public, but kept her innermost feelings guarded. Love and partnership. In 1931, Amelia married George Putnam, a publisher and promoter. Their marriage was unconventional for its time. Amelia insisted on an equal partnership. She wrote George a letter before they wed, famously declaring that she did not believe in binding promises of fidelity, and that if the marriage did not work, they would part as friends. It was a bold statement, shocking for the era, but it reflected her fierce independence. George, for his part, supported Amelia's career, even if he sometimes struggled with her need for freedom. Their relationship was one of balance, love tempered by respect for individuality. The public image versus the private self. The world saw Amelia as fearless, unstoppable, and endlessly confident. But in private, she wrestled with doubt. She admitted to nervousness before flights, confessed fears in letters, and sometimes worried that the public's image of her was larger than she could live up to. Her courage, then, was not the absence of fear, but the determination to act despite it. That is what made her human, and what makes her story universal. Hobbies and quiet joys. Amelia loved more than flying. She read voraciously, enjoyed poetry, and found comfort in solitude. She loved animals, often adopting pets. She gardened when she could, delighting in simple, grounding tasks. These small details remind us, she was not just the aviator in the sky. She was a woman who cherished quiet evenings, laughter with friends, and ordinary joys. A voice for others. Amelia used her fame to advocate for women. She gave speeches, wrote articles, and encouraged girls to pursue careers beyond traditional roles. She was not just a flyer. She was a teacher, a mentor, a guide. In her heart, she wanted her achievements to inspire others to chase their own skies. Struggles and pressures. Fame weighed heavily on Amelia. She felt the constant expectation to break records, to live up to her image. The world wanted perfection, but she knew she was imperfect. In private writings, she admitted exhaustion, the endless travel, the pressure of sponsorships, the demand for new challenges all took their toll, yet she rarely let it show. To the public, she remained steady, calm, and smiling. The last letters before her world flight, Amelia wrote farewell letters to loved ones, to be read if she did not return. In them, she expressed love, gratitude, and acceptance of risk to George. She wrote of her happiness in their marriage, but also her readiness to face whatever came. It was not resignation, but peace with her choice. These letters are among the most haunting glimpses of Amelia, not as an icon, but as a woman aware of mortality, yet unafraid. Amelia, the human, not the myth. Is easy to remember Amelia as a statue, a symbol, a mystery. But her true power lies in her humanity. She was brave, but she was also afraid. She was independent, but she loved deeply. She was strong, but she struggled. Her legend inspires us, but her humanity connects us. In the end, Amelia Earhart was not only the woman who vanished. She was the woman who lived, who laughed, loved, dreamed, and dared. And in remembering her as human, we honor her more than any myth ever could. Chapter 18. Theories and Speculations. When Amelia Earhart vanished on July 2, 1937, she left behind one of history's most enduring mysteries. For nearly a century, scholars, adventurers, and conspiracy theorists have searched for answers. Theories have bloomed and withered, ranging from the plausible to the fantastical. This chapter dives into the maze of speculation. Each theory, whether grounded in evidence or myth, reflects humanity's deep need to explain the unexplained. Amelia's disappearance is not just a historical puzzle. It is a canvas for imagination, science, and obsession. The official story, lost at sea, the most widely accepted explanation, is the simplest. Amelia and her navigator, Fred Noonan, ran out of fuel and crashed into the Pacific Ocean. Radio communications had grown desperate in the final hours of their flight. They were searching for Howland Island, a tiny speck of land in a vast ocean. The U.S. Coast Guard received her final transmission. "We are on the line 157 to 337. We are running north and south." Then silence. Search efforts combed the waters, but no wreckage was ever found. For many, this absence became proof of the ocean's vastness, a reminder that it swallows secrets whole. The Gardner Island hypothesis, one of the most compelling alternative theories, points to Gardner Island, now called Nikumaro. In 1940, British officials discovered skeletal remains there, along with women's shoes and a sextant box. At the time, the bones were dismissed as belonging to a man, but decades later, forensic reanalysis suggested they could have belonged to a woman of Amelia's build. Modern expeditions have uncovered fragments of glass, a pocket knife, and evidence of campfires. Tantalizing clues, but not definitive proof. Did Amelia and Fred survive, only to perish stranded on a remote island? It is a theory that continues to haunt researchers. The Japanese capture theory and other popular speculation suggests Amelia and Fred landed in the Marshall Islands, territory under Japanese control, in 1937. Some believe the Japanese captured them, suspecting them of espionage. This theory gained traction during World War II, when rumors spread of American prisoners being seen in the islands. Photos, anecdotal accounts, and even alleged eyewitness testimonies have fueled the idea. Yet no concrete evidence has ever surfaced. Still, the image of Amelia in captivity lingers in the cultural imagination, a narrative of heroism turned tragedy. The spy mission hypothesis, a more dramatic theory, proposes that Amelia was secretly working for the U.S. government. According to this idea, her world flight doubled as an intelligence mission, with her plane carrying equipment to photograph Japanese bases in the Pacific. Supporters argue that her disappearance may have been staged or covered up by the U.S. to conceal sensitive operations. Historians largely dismiss this as conspiracy, yet it persists, a reflection of how Amelia's story intersects with the era's geopolitics. The New Guinea crash theory. Some researchers believe Amelia never made it far past New Guinea. According to this theory, she may have encountered mechanical trouble early on and crashed into the ocean before reaching the Central Pacific. While less dramatic, it aligns with the logistical challenges of her flight. However, without wreckage, it remains speculation. Alien abduction and the phantasm. Not all theories are grounded in reality. Some fringe thinkers suggest Amelia was abducted by extraterrestrials, a tale fueled by the era's fascination with UFOs. Others spin stories of time travel, secret identities, or survival under assumed names. Though far-fetched, such theories reveal the depth of fascination Amelia inspires. She is not just a mystery. She is a mythic figure onto which we project our wildest imaginations. Psychology of speculation. Why do theories about Amelia endure? Because humans fear the void. We crave answers. A clean conclusion. She crashed. She died feels unsatisfying when no wreckage is found, no grave discovered. So we invent possibilities, some grounded in evidence, others in fantasy. In Amelia's silence, we hear our own need for closure. The search continues to this day. Expeditions set sail to the Pacific in search of answers. High-tech sonar scans the ocean floor. Drones sweep the waters. Archaeologists comb islands for traces of a lost aviator. Each new discovery, however, small reignites the debate. A scrap of metal, a radio signal, a photograph, all fuel the fire. The truth may lie beneath miles of water, or it may have been erased by time. But the search itself has become part of Amelia's legend, the legacy of uncertainty. In the end, perhaps no theory will ever be proven. Amelia's final moments may remain hidden forever, but this uncertainty is part of her enduring power. Her story is not bound by an ending. It is alive, open, and endlessly debated. And in that uncertainty, Amelia Earhart is not lost. She is eternal. Chapter 19. The endless search. The disappearance of Amelia Earhart was not the end of her story. In many ways, it was the beginning of a quest that has spanned generations. For nearly 90 years, researchers, governments, adventurers, and dreamers have scoured the Pacific in search of answers. The mystery has become a magnet for obsession, a puzzle that refuses to be solved, no matter how many resources are poured into it. This chapter traces the long and relentless search for Amelia, from the frantic days following her disappearance to the high-tech expeditions of the modern age. It is a story not just of wreckage and evidence, but of human determination to uncover truth from silence. The first search, 1937. The search began immediately after Amelia's last radio transmission. The U.S. Coast Guard cutter, Itasca, already stationed near Howland Island, sprang into action. Ships scoured the waters. Planes flew reconnaissance missions. President Franklin D. Roosevelt authorized the most extensive search effort in U.S. history. At that time, for 2 weeks, vessels crisscrossed thousands of miles of ocean. Naval aircraft flew low over uninhabited islands, peering for signs of life. But the Pacific is vast, and time is merciless. No wreckage, no survivors, just silence. By July 19, 1937, the official search was called off. For the world, Amelia's disappearance became a headline. For her loved ones, it became an open wound. Private expeditions in the 1930s. 47, after the government search ended, private efforts began. George Putnam, Amelia's husband, funded his own expeditions, refusing to give up hope. He believed Amelia might have landed on one of the remote islands scattered across the Pacific. But resources were limited, and the war clouds of the late 1930s soon shifted the world's focus. When World War II erupted, the search for Amelia faded into the background. Still, the mystery lingered. Soldiers and civilians stationed across the Pacific whispered rumors. Amelia's plane had been seen. Amelia had been captured. Amelia had died as a prisoner. These stories only deepened the enigma. The post-war era. New clues, new obsessions. After World War II, interest in Amelia's fate reignited. Veterans returning from the Pacific claimed to have heard stories of a foreign woman imprisoned by the Japanese. Some swore they had seen her. Theories of Japanese capture grew popular, drawing authors, journalists, and amateur detectives into the search. Expeditions were launched to the Marshall Islands and Saipan. Bones, photographs, and artifacts surfaced, though none were definitively linked to Amelia. The post-war years turned the mystery into a cultural phenomenon. Amelia was no longer just a lost aviator. She was a ghost haunting the Pacific. The rise of organized research 1960s, 1980s by the mid-20th century. Organized groups began devoting themselves to solving the case. Among the most influential was TIAR, the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery. TIAR focused on Nikamaroro, formerly Gardner Island, where bones and artifacts had been discovered decades earlier. Their expeditions uncovered items that sparked worldwide debate: a piece of aluminum that could have come from an aircraft, fragments of a woman's shoe, and evidence of survival camps. Each clue stirred headlines. Each was contested. The mystery remained alive, refusing to yield simple answers. Modern technology joins the hunting, the 21st century. The search for Amelia entered a new era. Sonar mapping, deep-sea submersibles, and satellite analysis brought unprecedented power to the quest. Robert Ballard, the oceanographer who discovered the wreck of the Titanic, led an expedition in 2019 to search the seafloor near Nick. His team used state-of-the-art equipment to scan depths that had never been explored. Yet once again, the ocean kept its secrets. No definitive wreckage was found. Other teams have focused on Howland Island and the surrounding seas, mapping the ocean floor with advanced sonar. Each time, hopes rise. But the silence remains. The cost of obsession, the search for Amelia, has consumed millions of dollars, decades of time, and countless hours of research. For some, it has become a lifelong pursuit. Why? Because Amelia's mystery is more than history. It is a symbol of the unknown, a story that refuses to end. To solve it would be to close a chapter humanity has kept open for nearly a century. Personal pilgrimages beyond the organized expeditions. Countless individuals have undertaken their own quests. Pilots retrace Amelia's route. Divers scour reefs. Amateurs study old maps and radio logs. For many, the search is personal. Amelia is not just a lost aviator. She is a beacon of inspiration, and to find her is to connect with that spirit of daring. The search has legacy. The endless search for Amelia Earhart is, in itself, part of her legacy. Her disappearance transformed her from a pioneering aviator into an eternal riddle. Each expedition, each theory, each whisper of evidence keeps her alive in our collective imagination. Perhaps the search will one day end with a discovery that closes the case, or perhaps it will go on forever, her fate destined to remain a mystery. But in that endless search lies the true power of Amelia's story. It reminds us that some mysteries are bigger than answers, and that the act of seeking can be as profound as the truth itself. Chapter 20: The Eternal Legacy. Amelia Earhart's disappearance is one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the 20th century, but her story is far more than the riddle of her final flight. Her legacy transcends the unanswered questions, echoing through history as a symbol of courage, determination, and the unyielding human spirit. In this final chapter, we reflect not only on her achievements and the search for truth, but also on why Amelia remains such an enduring figure, not just in aviation, but in culture, identity, and the imagination of generations. A life that defied gravity. Long before her last flight, Amelia had already carved her name into history. She was the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. She set speed and distance records that challenged the very limits of aviation. More importantly, she became a symbol of possibility. In an age when women were expected to stay grounded, figuratively and literally, Amelia soared. She showed the world that courage had no gender, that dreams were not bound by convention. Her life was not about flying alone. It was about showing others that they could fly too. The power of mystery. Paradoxically, Her disappearance amplified her legend. If she had returned safely from her world flight, she would have remained a celebrated aviator. But by vanishing, she became immortal. Her fate is unknown, her final moments unrecorded, and in that void, imagination takes flight. Amelia became not just a pilot, but a myth, a timeless figure whose story is retold in countless forms: books, films, documentaries, and whispered tales. The unanswered question, what happened to Amelia Earhart, keeps her alive in our collective memory. Inspiration across generations, Amelia's legacy has touched millions. For women in aviation, she is a trailblazer. For dreamers, she is proof that boundaries can be broken. For those lost in their own uncertainties, she is a reminder that to attempt the impossible is itself a victory. Her courage inspired the women, Air Force service pilots WASP, during World War II. It fueled the expansion of opportunities for women in aviation and beyond. Even today, every young pilot who looks to the sky carries a piece of Amelia's spirit. Cultural icon Amelia Earhart is more than a historical figure. She is a cultural icon. Her image, with leather jacket and aviator goggles, has become shorthand for adventure. Her story is taught in classrooms, depicted in movies, and celebrated in art. She represents a fusion of fact and legend, as much symbol as person. A woman who dared, and by daring, transcended time. The eternal question, her legacy endures partly because her story remains unfinished. The search continues. Theories multiply. Each new expedition is another attempt to write the final chapter, but perhaps her story does not need an ending. Perhaps the endless search is part of her myth, the idea that she is always just beyond reach, flying forever into the horizon. Lessons from Amelia Earhart's life teaches us three enduring lessons. Courage in the face of risk. She knew her journey was dangerous, but she pursued it anyway, because fear should never dictate the limits of possibility. The importance of representation. She broke barriers not only for herself, but for all who would come after her. Her flight was not just for Amelia, it was for every woman told she could not. The power of mystery. Sometimes it is not answers but questions that endure. Her disappearance reminds us that not everything can be known, and that uncertainty itself can inspire. The eternal flight. Amelia once said, "Adventure is worthwhile in itself." Those words are her epitaph. Her final flight, though incomplete, was an adventure that continues to inspire. She may not have reached Howland Island, but she reached something greater, a place in the human imagination that no ocean can swallow. Her plane may rest beneath the waves, her body may lie on a forgotten shore, but her spirit soars endlessly, reminding us to dream, to dare, and to fly. Conclusion. The vanishing that haunts us. Amelia Earhart vanished, but she was never lost. She exists in every unanswered question, every search, every theory. She is the unfinished story we cannot stop telling. And perhaps that is the truest form of immortality, to live forever in the curiosity, wonder, and dreams of those who come after. Amelia Earhart's final flight may have ended in silence, but her legacy is an eternal echo, a voice carried by the winds, whispering to us still, dare to fly, dare to dream, dare to vanish into greatness. Amelia Earhart set out to conquer the impossible, and instead became a mystery that refuses to rest. To this day, her disappearance is not just a question of aviation, but of human ambition, courage, and the shadows that history hides from us. Perhaps we will never know what truly happened on that final flight, but the silence she left behind still echoes across the Pacific, haunting us all. If you were drawn into this story of the unknown, join us here on Dark History, where we uncover the secrets that the past cannot bury. Subscribe, and step with us into the mysteries that still wait in the dark.